Folks, welcome back to the Crossing Swords podcast, mid-season edition, brought to you by Outlet Liquor, the place to buy a case. I'm MANIAC, and it has been a little bit of a crazy season for the Sabres, and not in a good way, it's safe to say. But we're here to talk it through and look to the second half of the season here with our guy Gatesy, and of course, you know him for the Bills game and coverage there, Intern Vinnie. Gentlemen, how are we feeling headed into this weekend?
I'm feeling pretty good. All-Star game's going on. I know everyone's read every single one of my works so far for Trainwreck, so it's probably good for everyone to hear my voice finally.
Yeah, I'd say, just sort of rocking and rolling and excited to have a little bit of, I guess I'm not excited to have a little bit of a break here, but with the Olympics, a lot of sports happening, which of course is always a good thing.
Always good to see that sports landscape. And not needless to say, with the way the Sabres have been playing the last 2 to 3 months, not bad for them to get another break here. They've had some COVID breaks sprinkled in, but not bad for them to get another break. Obviously, Sabres, not exactly the midseason point. They played 45 games, but 14, 24, and 7. I would say record-wise, guys, this is probably what people expected from this team just about coming into the season. No one was thinking that they were going to be world beaters. There were some maybe expectations that maybe this is even over exceeding, the expectations for the season. But with that said, and given the record, 10 games under 500, what do you guys see so far? And let's start with Gatesy here. As the biggest positives so far for the Sabres this season, surprise-wise?
One of the biggest surprises has been kind of the reemergence of Tage Thompson's career. Kind of going into the season, he's almost listed as like a 3C possibility for the Sabres. And thankfully, for the start of the year, he's been able to kind of get his game back and kind of be the person everyone kind of wanted him to be. So I'm just really happy for him to kind of get things going for himself.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. I think sort of on that same line, a lot of people knew that this year was going to be a year where we really wanted to focus on sort of the development of some of the younger guys on the team. So sort of on that same path, I think one of the biggest positive surprises was that we were able to see some action from guys like Peyton Krebs play in the NHL and find success in the league. I think that was something that maybe some people were worried about, maybe not being able to click right away. And of course, Krebs especially has sort of pushed that notion aside by playing so well, especially with Tuck on his line. They've sort of played, I think, better than people were expecting for guys that were so young. So I think that's probably the biggest positive surprise so far this season is some of the young guys like Quinn and Krebs kind of seeing some ice time and doing well with said ice time.
Kind of leapfrogging on your Krebs point, the way that Tuck and Krebs have both filled into this lineup when called upon. I mean, I think Tuck has instantly become, in that upper tier of leadership and veteran persona on this squad. So very excited to that. And again, that's something, we didn't know about coming into the season because we didn't know what the return was going to be for Jack Eichel or what we were going to have in that situation. There were a lot of people thinking he might still be a Sabre and sitting on the shelf right now. So he's obviously getting ready to make his debut pretty shortly here. But with that said, Sabres are liking the early returns. With that said, there are a lot of returns and a lot of things happening early and often this season that we don't like. So Vinnie, let's start with you on this one. What is, your biggest negative surprise for the season? Obviously, low expectations coming in.
Right. I feel like I'm going to take a pretty obvious one here, so I apologize. But I think the biggest negative surprise is just the slew of injuries that have sort of plagued the entire team. I think you go into a year expecting injuries at some point. It's if you go through a sporting season without any injuries, I mean, that is, quite frankly, it's a miracle. But this year, the way the Sabres have just sort of had to really, really scrape the bottom of the barrel for, goalies specifically. And I think that's probably the biggest surprise is just the fact that the goalies just can't seem to stay healthy. And of course, you have Craig Anderson, who's sort of up there in age. You can't really expect him to play. He's not going to play 60 games for you, of course. But just even as you go down your depth chart to see injuries sort of all the way through, of course, Tokarski had problems with COVID, which is not a great thing. That's sort of different than a true injury, if you will. You can't really, like, if your elbow hurts, then it's one thing, but sort of that's a little bit more complex than a regular, like an injury with a muscle or a bone. So just the fact that that's really affected them so much, I don't think that anybody would have predicted before the season that we would be seeing this many goalies play just past the halfway point.
Yeah, I mean, kind of tying into that, the injuries have just been demolishing to the Sabres, and they've kind of been a team that didn't really have a lot of high hopes. Some guys wouldn't get an opportunity like this on other franchises. So I think one of my biggest disappointments is the overall effort in a lot of games. If you're not going to be a big high-scoring team that's going to blow teams out of the water, you have to work hard every single game, kind of run teams into the dirt. And frankly, there's been so many games this year, you turn on the first 5 minutes, you're like, you know how this game's going to go. They're going to get up a couple early goals and just kind of coast through the rest of it and be an embarrassment, like that game against Calgary. And even that last game against Vegas, it's just like, it's really hard to buy into watching a really bad team play like that.
It is difficult. And yeah, to kind of leapfrog what you guys saying, like you can go into the Casey Middlestat situation as well, which has been an outright train wreck, pun not intended this season. But, you know, for me, I'm looking at Olofsson. I mean, this is a guy that 2-3 years ago, this was supposed to be your core. Like, this was supposed to be a scorer that could get it done no matter what, especially when he was playing with Eichel. I guess, obviously, that's counting against him now that he doesn't have those, you know, frosty feeds coming in. But with that said, I mean, it's just kind of inexcusable the way he's completely fallen off a cliff here. He's pacing 10 goals this season. And again, if he's playing injured, it's something that's kind of unknown to the fans as well as the media. So very odd to see and not very happy about that. So moving on. So we talked a little bit about what's happened so far this season. Let's take a little bit of a outward approach here. So we got Kevin Adams and Don Granato, obviously two personas who haven't exactly I'm not saying I don't think they've, you know, pissed off any fans. I don't think anybody's gotten too upset at either of these guys. I know that in the beginning, obviously, when he took the role, a lot of people criticized Adams for some of his rhetoric, saying that he was kind of a Pagula puppet. And again, we're calling it straight. We're saying what they're talking about here. But I think both are kind of fitting into their roles nicely. I mean, we saw Granato get fired up the other night at Colorado. And again, it was in a blowout loss, basically, or it was in a game that, you know, you weren't really in. So you hate to see that. But with that said, it kind of reminded me of Lindy Ruff. And I hadn't seen that fire ever, you know, in all the coaches that have been since Housley, Kruger, you know, I can't even remember their names now. Teddy Nolan, obviously. The guy with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Bialsma, yes. Yeah. Bialsma. Like, again, I just want to see some fire. And again, the other factor, again, I'm not saying anything new here, so I apologize to all our Crossing Swords fans out there, but all the players almost instantly improved under Granato versus Kruger. So that was nice to see. With that said, I want to bring up this point to you guys because obviously at some point you have to start looking at the output of the team and what's overall happening. Do you think the clock for these two truly starts at the start of this upcoming season, or is it maybe already started? Where do you guys think that, you know, these guys are on the clock or on the hot seat for, you know, the output of the squad?
I mean, this year most fans kind of assumed would be a wash. So I think any sort of positive we can take out of is a big thing. So my whole thing is next season's when I think the lens really starts to shine on these two. I think they've both really shown that they're capable to be in these positions. It's just kind of consistency from top to bottom of the organization. And if they can kind of straighten that out this summer, kind of get these younger guys into play, and Granato gets them to play better, I think they can keep them around for a little bit. I think I want to know who our coach and GM is, and it's not a different person every 2 years. I think that's maybe something we go for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think personally, I would like their clock to maybe not have started yet. I mean, they had a lot of things on their plate when you think about it. Of course, Adams, I was admittedly one of the people that was sort of concerned about sort of how that all created into him getting the general manager position. I was sort of unsure of how well he would do. So far, I can't really say I have many things to complain about, quite frankly. I mean, one of the big things was, of course, the Eichel trade situation comes up, and I think he handled that relatively well. I mean, you know, it's a little early still. I mean, Eichel hasn't even played for Vegas yet, and of course, some of the returns
probably won't truly know that for like a year and a half still.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. So like, but at first glance, right, it doesn't look like we got fleeced per se, right? You know, as they say in some of those trades. So I think that's a perfectly fine job by him. And on the other hand, I think Don Granato definitely showed that he can coach some of the young guys well and that they play well under him. And I think it's just tough with the lineup this year. I mean, especially like we said, with all the injuries, I don't think you could really expect much. However, sort of to contradict myself, I think their clock has started because that's just how it works in the NHL. You don't really have a ton of time. You don't really have like 4 years to maybe sort of right the ship, slowly and then sort of make your plan. You kind of try to have to make things happen fast. They, might get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because of some of these injuries, which is good. I think they should, but I just think the way the NHL works, I don't know. I don't think they're going to get that much longer than anybody else does. I think they're still probably going to get, 2 years. You just got to see something tangible before we can say like, well, all right, they might be here for 4. I think it's more realistic that their clock has definitely started.
I agree. It's just such a weird situation. You bring in the COVID, you bring in the Eichel, and then with this year, again, not to make excuses, because you really do have to look at this organization because, the injuries have been absolutely absurd, whether it's the conditioning, whatever. I'm not pointing any fingers. You have to look at something to get these players healthier because it just seems crazy. But 6 goaltenders this year, it's just kind of not a feasible situation. I'm sure if you look historically on the teams that have used 6 goaltenders, and in their case, multiple games for all the goaltenders. So it's not like 2 guys for 1 game each or something. They were getting some reps. So it's a weird situation that realistically their clock has started, that they are being assessed on a daily basis, and the overall state of the team does matter. But I feel like it's going to kind of refresh come October 2022. If this team starts hot, even though the fan base definitely will not give in because we've seen 2 hot starts in the last 3 years, obviously that would be a lot going in the right direction for Kevin and Don. And speaking of Kevin, obviously with a chance to prove it, a lot of, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Mumbo jumbo, a lot of buzz about Colin Miller potentially being an offseason beast. Did you guys see that rumor a couple weeks back about like a 1st-round pick for Miller or something? Was that the Sabres leaking that, like wanting that?
I think it was very similar to the Matt Tkachuk rumor that was floating around by Kevin.
Kevin needs to make this a little bit less obvious when he's floating these because, I don't want to assume, and if we're wrong, we're wrong. But, come on, you got to put a little camouflage on these bad boys.
Yeah, GMs have a mind, you got to think. Like Colin Miller for a first, as a Sabres fan, you're like, that would be like the best you could ever get out of him. But it's tough as a fan. You kind of bring these players in for years on end, kind of build a rapport with them, and then things just you trade him for another guy that's going to fill in that spot 3-4 years down the road. I think fans are at the point now where they're just kind of done with trading these established guys for picks. But at the end of the day, it's probably what's best for this team, and they need the help in the future. Like right now, again, with guys being UFAs and RFAs, it's not going to do anything good to lose them for nothing.
Yeah, I think one of the things you can sort of look at with the Sabres is, do you have an opportunity to maybe like replace these rostered players with somebody that's in your pipeline already? You got like Casey Fitzgerald who's playing this year. I don't how good really is he? Obviously Owen Power is going to be good, and you hope that he makes, is on the team next year and playing good minutes. You have Ryan Johnson who's in the pipeline who, might be able to come into the NHL and play well. Maybe he's not ready for that yet. I don't really know where a lot of people consider him. He's sort of a guy that after he drafted, development was definitely needed there. And it seems like it's happened. He's played very well lately in college. So I think, I think you have to look at what you're really getting from Colin Miller and what you maybe might be able to get just because is he really going to be part of, I guess, your future? I don't know. Like you mentioned, maybe Olofsson, it's a real shame because he was truly one of the draft hits of the past couple Sabres years. The Sabres have not drafted well at all over the past, I want to say 6 years, 5 years, except for their 1st-round picks for the most part. You have obviously Eichel hit, Reinhart hit, Dahlin hit. It's sort of, I'm not going to say hard to miss on those, but yeah, right? So I think when it comes down to it, you're sort of admitting that you haven't drafted well, but I think this is probably the right time to move on from him, especially with another guy like Ruotsalainen. I think he might be sort of the same type of player Olofsson is on that power play. I think that's a possibility we might be able to see at some point here.
And let's face it, at the very least, he's going to be better for the Star Wars promotion night. So, that's the kind of stuff you got to look at, this fan experience, Gatesy.
That's what's really important here is Star Wars night at KeyBank.
Even though the Sabres are rarely playing into May, because obviously you'd have to get to May 4th for Star Wars Day. But hey, okay, so now obviously we talked about what we might see from Kevin. What are 2 to 3 things? Unfortunately, guys, I think playoffs might be out of the reach at this point. I don't want to assume, but what are a couple of things that you guys might want to see from this team heading down the stretch?
I guess my first thing that's not really tangible is just overall compete for the team. As I've kind of talked about in my articles, it's been so hot and cold. I feel like I'm listening to a Katy Perry song. It's just, you never know what you're going to get with this team. And as all these Sabres fans can probably guess, is like, you don't want to turn on a game at 7:00 at night and sit there and just kind of waste your night watching a team that doesn't really want to be out there. So if we can get an overall consistency, that would be incredible. And another thing I just love to see is kind of that second half resurgence that Dahlin had last year for this year, at least in terms of his overall acceptance with the fan base, because it's hard to see such a young, promising player almost get berated by the Buffalo faithful just because of the player he is and the position he's in. He's playing almost 30 minutes a night. He's killing penalties, and it's unfortunate, but hopefully he can kind of get another renaissance again this year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was sort of one of the things I was thinking about, is just seeing a good second half from Dahlin, put up some points, make some more nice plays. And that's something that it's sort of means good things. I guess it's fun to watch, at least when Dahlin has the puck. His puck control is very good for the most part. So being able to watch that and sort of see that happen is something that's hopeful for the future. So I wouldn't mind seeing him develop a little bit more confidence at the tail end of the year too. Another thing I want to see, doesn't really help the Sabres too much. Of course, you know, making the playoffs, obviously basically out of the question, even though I guess mathematically possible. I would like to see Skinner get to 30 goals. That's one of the things that I would really like to see by this year. I think it would be a nice confidence boost for him. I assume he's playing confidently. He's got 16 already, just past halfway. He's on pace where he's going to be right around that mark, and I'd like to see him do it. The year that he got 40 goals, he trailed off at the end of the year. He sort of didn't score for like 8 games, and he scored twice against Detroit, and that got him to 40. I would like to see him get to 30, get to 33 or something. Just continue consistent goal scoring. Don't taper off at the end of the year and sort of end on a confident note for him. Of course, with his contract, he's going to be on the team for a while here, you assume. And just with that said, I want him to continue to be a goal scorer, continue to be a guy who can make things happen in terms of putting points up for the team. So I think getting to 30 goals would be a good thing for the Sabres and a good thing for Jeff for this year.
It's kind of an understated thing too, because when you talk about turning around this ship, if you had 8 to 9 or 9 million in just basically 15 to 20 goals, which Skinner was which was maybe even looking like a ceiling under Ralph Kruger for a little bit. Yeah, that was a dangerous situation. It was going to make it very difficult to turn on. Like you've seen with the contracts that they've had in the past, especially, hate to mention it because he's actually playing pretty well this year, Okposo for like the last 4 years there. But with that said, you get that turned around. A couple of things I'd like to see. Let's have Tuck. I've already mentioned it. Continue that leadership. Continue to establish himself. Obviously, it seems like he loves the Buffalo Sabres. Everything he says is blue and gold. So let's just keep having him do what he's doing. And I know the goalie situations are all like shrouded in mystery. It was like you didn't know if Anderson was going to come back for a little while. I mean, I'd like to see UPL come back, like even just for a little bit and still a little confidence, even though it would just be, just an appearance. But you hate to not know what you have going into the goalie situation again for basically like the 5th straight year. It'd be very frustrating. So hopefully that gets straightened out, but definitely would like to see some stability in the goaltender position. And obviously UPL coming back and doing what he was doing before would go a long way in that. Well, hey, we're wrapping it up here on the mid-season Crossing Swords podcast show. Make sure you're following these guys. You got V Cristiano 3 and you got Gatesy 35 tearing it up on the timelines. I hate to say this, guys. Panthers, Knights, Cup Final. Is it inevitable?
I don't know if it's inevitable because I bet on something like that happening, and I bet on
then it's definitely not going to happen.
Very good.
I know how you are with your luck and your superstitious.
Yeah, so I'm not feeling very confident in that. Maybe I'll bet on it on FanDuel and it'll do better, but I think that would be a fun final to watch, though, if it did happen.
100%.
I mean, that would be, opportunity to root. I mean, I don't know about everybody else. If we get an opportunity to see Jack Eichel versus Sam Reinhart in the Stanley Cup Final, I mean, that would be fun to
Gatesy
watch.
did a
right?
full face rub. You know what they say in Seinfeld? When you touch the face, you're in trouble. And he did a full face rub when he heard that.
That would be very, very painful. But at the same time, that's such fun hockey to watch. And I think as a hockey fan, maybe that would be really interesting. But it seems like the cards are sort of stacked to maybe this might be something that's very, very possible to have happen here in the end of May and into June.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I'm personally ready for that to happen yet. Especially with the season that's going on for the Sabres, just to see. I mean, even watching Bogosian lift the cup, it was awesome. But it's just that's just still seeing a guy run out of town, find instant success. It's really embarrassing as a person from Buffalo, and I'm as happy as I am for them, and I want them to succeed. Just give me a couple years to process everything first. That's all I'm asking.
That's actually a good point. That is, I don't know if that happens. I assume you go on Twitter and everybody's like, wow, isn't that, didn't take long because if that's the final, one of them is going to win a cup in their first year out of Buffalo, which is just, situationally, that's just such a nightmare. I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah. What happened? You just made it sound like Twitter's going to be like dandelion fields and rainbows. It's going to be a war zone if those two are in the Stanley Cup Finals.
To be fair.
And Lehner.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Lehner, I think we've already sort of, that wound has scabbed over.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah. I forgot about it until you brought it up. So,
you could say the same thing. There's I don't know, as somebody who's just if you're looking for good hockey, that would be really good hockey. The Stanley Cup Final is always good hockey, but yeah, I think, and as much as I would want to root for those two guys, and I probably will, I know that there'll be probably a week of just absolute terror for opening the blue app with the bird on it on your phone. Maybe after that. Maybe I'll wait a week before I open Twitter again after the Stanley Cup Final, if that's what happens. It would be cool, but it would also be heartbreaking. I don't, maybe emotionally I'm not ready for it, but right now I sort of think it would be fun.
And be a little selfish here. The articles will do pretty well that week. I can tell you that for free. So
yeah, that's true.
That is true. That would be a big quick week. So, hey, speaking of engagement, making sure you're following us along. Twitter, Twitch, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, MySpace, everything. We love it. We love our crew here. Make sure, again, follow them on Twitter, Gatesy35, VCristiano3. Huge shout out to them. And huge shout out to the Sabres fans checking along, tag along with the team. These last couple seasons have not been easy. This one's been difficult. A lot of last-second losses, a lot of blown leads. So shout out to you for following along, because it's always 3 words here at the Crossing Swords podcast.
Let's go, Buffalo.
Oh!